Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. Joining us now is the next congressman from, I should have asked what district he will be representing, but he is, which district? He is the next congressman from the 12th district in the state, the great state of, come on, I want to do this. The great state of California is a constitutional attorney who works at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, a grassroots activist, an artist, and candidate challenging Nancy Pelosi in the Democratic primary, Shahid Buttar. Shahid, I hope I did that right, and thank you so much for being here.
You did. Thanks so much for bringing me on, Michael.
Shahid, why are you challenging Nancy Pelosi?
I'm challenging Nancy Pelosi because we have a Democratic Speaker of the House who appears to be very favorable towards conservative policies. We can see that demonstrated in Speaker Pelosi's reticence to seek executive accountability of a criminal president. We can see that reflected in Speaker Pelosi's unilateral and unprompted attacks on young progressives in the House, opening the door for our criminal president to follow on, demonizing those figures, including Representatives Ocasio-Cortez, Tlaib, Omer, and others. Race baiting, effectively, is what the president was doing. And for better or worse, Speaker Pelosi opened the door to those attacks. You can see the same concerns demonstrated in Speaker Pelosi's support for Trump's foreign policy from Venezuela to Palestine. And you can see that same support for conservative interests demonstrated particularly in Speaker Pelosi's unilateral, unprompted adoption of Republican fiscal austerity rules. These were accounting rules known as the PAYGO rules that effectively discriminate against progressive spending interests like affordable housing or healthcare, and instead bias federal spending towards military, industrial, fraud, waste, and abuse. And ultimately, I think that San Francisco deserves a representative in Washington who is aligned with our city's proud values instead of working to undermine them.
What's your background in terms of, where are you coming from? What shapes your politics and who you are and what you're about?
Great question. Thanks for asking. I'm an immigrant to the United States. My family came to rural Missouri when I was 2 years old from Britain, and they had moved to Britain before I was born from Pakistan. And in those two migrations, we fled first religious persecution in Pakistan and then racial discrimination in the UK. As an immigrant to the United States who's had the opportunity to train and teach at Stanford Law School, I have a very deep commitment to our nation's founding and fundamental principles. Freedom and liberty are not abstract concepts to me. And, my view towards the First Amendment reflects this very, I would say, deep-seated patriotism. I take a great deal of inspiration from our founding commitments. I think the rest of the world has as well. And that identity as someone who has grown up in the United States as part of a family with one foot outside it has been, I think, for me, very pivotal in helping me place, frankly, current events in context, whether we see that through the lens of, my essential lens when evaluating policy is the extent to which it is liberatory or instead of promotion of social control. And I think that's something that being a post-colonial advocate helps me see through that lens more easily. Other things that have shaped me included the national security state that emerged in the years since Bush invaded Iraq. I was in law school at Stanford from 2000 to 2003. So the particular set of events that I had a chance to encounter and observe very closely when I was studying what passes for law in our country included the Bush versus Gore decision, the 9/11 attacks, the passage of the Patriot Act, and the invasion of Iraq. And it was hard to live through that set of events studying antitrust law, which was my original focus when I started law school. I wanted to bust big corporations for the government when I got done, and I got the job that would have given me a chance to do that, except the Bush administration had effectively shut down antitrust enforcement, and it's never, frankly, been resuscitated since. And at the same time, a constitutional crisis erupted under our feet, which also has not been addressed since. And so I've basically dedicated my career over the last 20 years to defending not only privacy in the face of the mass surveillance regime, but ultimately the freedom to dissent. And democracy is what I've been defending in the last 20 years in the face of a national security state promoted by administrations of both corporate political parties that I fear is doing great damage to democracy in America.
That's 100%. And so can you connect that? Because you talk about, San Francisco values, and I know what you mean in the sense that it's not my home, obviously, but I definitely have some connections to people in the broader Bay who have incredible commitments and are part of very deep traditions. And then at the same time, the parlance of modern politics. And I think what another aspect of what Pelosi is representing, and what has also created so many, atrocities in terms of gentrification and lack of housing and so on, is the industry that you would be representing to some extent, in Congress, and overlaps also with your whole history in terms of antitrust and so on. How would you relate, and of course, surveillance and national security issues as well? How would you position yourself relative to the Silicon Valley industry as a congressman representing that part of the world?
Also, another great question. I'm running to represent one of the seats of the global tech industry, and I'm running for that seat having been, for the last 5 years, the director of grassroots advocacy at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which is sometimes described as the conscience of Silicon Valley. In some respects, I find that description to be somewhat inapt because we spend as much time, frankly, fighting tech firms as we do fighting the government, frankly. And so I would be entering Congress as a committed skeptic of technology companies, particularly the big ones, and a skeptic of the national security state that has largely co-opted many of those large tech firms into being either willing or unwilling participants in mass surveillance. A couple of things to note here is that there's a vast distinction between the interests of the owners of tech firms, like the founders who have this very storied set of libertarian principles, and that tends to be consistent across many of the companies, and the workers at these companies, which have very divergent interests from their bosses. And it's a lot like any other industry in that respect, except that even the workers in this industry are highly compensated. They also happen to be quite sophisticated and aware, for instance, that no amount of economic privilege is going to insulate them from the vagaries of the mounting global climate crisis, which is one reason why I'm very confident that we'll have an opportunity to gain a great deal of support from workers in the industry, even though the industrial interests that employ them might have a great many reasons to fear the likes of me entering Congress, because it might, for instance, resuscitate antitrust enforcement. We might, for instance, ask the questions that you haven't heard in oversight hearings to this point. How much money are each of the platforms making from collaboration with the FBI, with the NSA, with the DEA? These are questions, frankly, that the American people don't know, and we deserve to.
100%. You've just watched a Michael Brooks show video, and you can watch all of our full main live shows every Tuesday night at around 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and subscribe to get all of the clips you want. We're covering the globe. We're focusing on international relations, the intellectual dark web. We're having fun. We're doing deep dives with a lot of amazing guests. Of course, become a patron for the whole thing at patreon.com/TMBS, or subscribe to this YouTube channel and help us keep growing and get that content out there. Subscribe below.